Thank you. I'm going to make my presentation in a bit different way because I'm a historian. But I will also talk about the future and the Russian future. But let me start in another way. In 2024, there will be a presidential election in Russia. And people often ask me, who will win? And there is just one answer: Vladimir Putin. He will be forced to break the law, but I'm sure he'll fix it in a simple way. The other day he said that, well, he will not be a candidate 2030. And then he's an old man. But the very brief answer to the question, what will happen to Russia during the next decade, I would say it will be the same. It will be Putin, it will be Putinism, it will be this authoritarian rule that we see right now with a parliament, with political parties, but with no openness, with restricted human and civil rights. The simplistic answer is that. But I will try a more different or difficult way, because when Russia and Russians, they discuss the future, they always turn to history. The Russians' historical consciousness is very well developed. That is, they always turn to historical interpretations in order to orientate in life. For when they feel fear for the future, or when they feel something positive of the future, they always find it in history. And Russian history is a kind of sediment of different cultures, and different groups, different collectives in Russia, they excavate different layers or strata in their history in order to find a way for the future. And I will demonstrate very briefly how I think about this and how Russians think about this. Russia started, quotation mark, started in the 9th century when Vikings from Scandinavia, they traveled down Dnieper and Volga in order to find the commercial places that were important at that time. So at that time, Ingvar became Igor, to say it very briefly. In this period, we will find documents that prove that Russia was a part of the Baltic Sea area, a part of Europe, a part of the Hansa network of that time. And this part of history has been extremely well excavated during Gorbachev's period and Yeltsin's period, but not today. Most Russians of today are not so interested in this period. We had the so-called Zapadniki, that is the westernizers. They turned to this period of history to say something about the lack of democracy, the lack of rule of law, the lack of civil society in Russia. And they always said that, well, we can find a part of our history adding to the European or Baltic Sea history. And these Zapadniki, they wanted to bring Russia closer to democracy, to rule of law. But almost no one in Russia digs in this stratum today. There is not so much interest in liberal democracy. Putin said the other day, liberalism has outlived its purpose. Another problem with this stratum is that even Ukrainians dig here, because they are also a part of this stratum. And of course, Ukrainians and Russians, they don't like each other in these days. If we turn to the next layer of historical culture, we will find the Mongol or Tatar stratum. From the 13th century, Russia was part of the Mongol Golden Horde, and Russia changed its orientation from Europe to Asia at this time. There was a concentration of political and economic power in Russia at that time, reminiscent of the one of the Golden Horde, the Mongols' rule. And Putin, the other day, when he talked to history teachers in Russia, he said that this Mongol period is a very valuable period for Russia today. I don't know if he meant that there are clans of ruling people, siloviki, as they are called in Russian, that is the old groups from the military, from the foreign office, from the security police, that play an enormous role in Russia today. But the other thing I think you wanted to say is that this orientation towards Asia, and especially China, will be important in the future. There has been a kind of Russian nationalism that we call Eurasianism for many decades, that it Russia in a position between Asia and Europe. But this Asian orientation in Russia is strong today, and I think in the near future we will see this axis, Moscow, Beijing, being stronger. Putin also said to this history teacher, we will see the dawn of the East and the new political orders. And maybe there is some kind of similarity between the Chinese and the Russian ruling society that Putin will be satisfied with. And especially there is a kind of anti-Western idea behind it. The third layer is the imperial layer. Russia started as an empire in the mid-16th century, and I think this development hasn't come to a stop yet. In Russian imperial tradition, there is a strong focus on держава, as it's called in Russian, that is great power or great power status. A focus on military and economic development, of conquest, downplaying, for example, the ethnic dimension, which is so obvious since the days of glasnost and perestroika. There is an old Kremlological pattern. I normally do not believe in Kremlology, that is, old historical patterns repeating themselves again and again. But I think there is one important pattern that you can describe as outward aggression promotes inward consolidation. And this is what we see in Russia today. Putin is very popular. His rule is popular. And these adventures in Georgia in 2008, in the Ukraine that we still live with starting in 2014, in Syria since 2015, in Venezuela during the latest years, is very popular at home. It's a kind of divide and rule politics that we have seen already during the Soviet period in playing out different ethnic groups against each others. And these international adventures are especially interesting because Russia always built its empire in the neighborhood before. But today they are building a more international, well, empire is too much maybe, but nevertheless. The last of the layers that I want to focus on is the modernization layer. The layer goes back to Peter the Great, who traveled in Europe, and then he came home to Russia and said, well, we have to modernize our country in order to win wars in the future. We have to modernize. But the Russian modernization has always been a very unbalanced modernization. There has always been a modernization of the economy, of the military machine, but no corresponding modernization of political life or, for that matter, cultural life. And I would say that we see the same situation in Moscow today. This modernization that Putin is in the forefront for is extremely halting and unbalanced. And we will see it also in the future. I think that Putin is not a democrat. Putin has one national idea, and Putin's national idea is Vladimir Putin, nothing else. There are no strong political alternatives. And the big changes in Russian life is always a result of revolutions of expectations. But there are no such expectations in Russian life today. There are no alternative ideas like during Gorbachev's period, when we had a lot of different ideas fighting against each other. But today there is a lack of political alternative and alternative ideas. There are demonstrators, as you know, in Russian streets and squares today. But the problem with these demonstrators is that they have no ideology behind them. Not even Navalny, the great demonstrator, has a kind of organized ideology behind them. So what we see today is a fully fledged authoritarianism, which is backward-looking, takes its base in traditional power groups. And Putin is strongly for stability and unity, and he hates revolution, even the October Revolution. And he has a very good control of the mass media and the judicial system.
Thank you very much, Klas-Göran.
Okay.
Don't get depressed. We will be looking for some light. You mentioned the enormous historical consciousness in the Russian population, or in some layers of it. When we heard Gina talk about how President Trump and his government is changing the direction of the United States, looking inwards, isolating itself, would you say that what Putin is doing with Russia is not something new? Does it go along with historical direction?
Yes, I think it's absolutely, yes. Not so much the Soviet past, because the Soviet past has so many problematic aspects, like the Winter War, the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact. So Putin is very interested in military feats, Russia's military feats, and of course this patriotic war against the Nazis is important. But there are so many problematic aspects of it. So Putin has fled to the pre-Soviet Russian history.
Is he also
Today he's raising monuments of old Tsars with one characteristic: they were for stability and hard politics.
Any other comments, questions, reflections?
I'm interested to know what you think about the US-Russia relations and where they're heading, and also the relationship between Putin and Trump.
Yeah. Yesterday, Putin had a speech at the university outside Moscow, and he talked about the good relations between himself and Trump, and he said that this has not been seen during the modern era at all. This very good relation to Donald Trump. I'm not sure whether we should believe what he says, but I think he has hope for America in a way that very few Russian rulers had before.
But that would be something completely new if we had such a relation
Yeah.
between the United States and Russia.
Of course. I think maybe it's on the individual level that he had found that it's easy to talk to Donald Trump. But this is important.
Rusby?
No, I just wanted to comment on that, but I mean, at the same time, the thing here is that there isn't, at least part of the good relationship, the fact that Trump is wrecking American status and respect, and thereby leaving a lot of room for Putin. If you look at what's happening in northern Syria, Putin is brokering the agreement that allows Assad to retake territory otherwise would not be able to retake.
No.
So Russia looks good for helping save the Kurds. The Turks get pushed back, and Donald Trump takes all the blame. Which is, he kind of put himself in it. So Putin wins by helping Donald Trump screw things up first.
Well, I'm not sure he takes all the blame, because I think there is blame on Russia and Vladimir Putin too in his Syrian war. So I think maybe the blame is divided, but you have a point, absolutely.
But it sounds very depressive almost to hear this image of Russia as one strong leader, one movement, demonstrators that don't have any real direction or ideology. Isn't there like a generation gap, or do you see any other future for Russia than the one you pointed out?
I was waiting for this question, so when I walk down here, I think I have to have a good answer and give them some positive output. But it's quite difficult. Putin is very popular among young people. There is no generational divide or any other divide, and the ethnic question, it seems like Putin has solved it once and for all. The Russian Empire or the Russian Federation is a very calm one today. He has situated his own men in the leadership of these ethnic and administrative territories that you find in the Russian Federation. So, well, it's difficult to find something very nice to say about Russia today.
Thanks for your try anyway. Thank you for your try. Thank you very much, Klas-Göran.